Hey guys, tonight we're going to do something a little strange. We're going to drift off to sleep by unraveling the soft, frilly thread of history, starting with one of the most exhausting things of all time, trying to get a good night's rest. Not today, not in your soft memory foam bed. No, way, way back. Before blue light, before alarm clocks, before even mattresses were a thing you could buy without knowing a blacksmith. And all of this leads us, strangely, inevitably, to a French queen who once wore so much lace, it basically got her arrested. You ever lay in bed unable to sleep and wonder, did people in the 1700s sleep better than you? No social media, no emails, no snoring partner with a podcast in one ear? Sounds perfect. Except you'd probably be sleeping on straw, wrapped in something that smells like sheep. And if you snored too loud, someone might assume you're possessed. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, comment below where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's always night somewhere. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. ChatGPT Noi. You walk down a cold stone hallway, candles flickering along the walls like watchful eyes. You're not dreaming, though it might feel like it. No, you're trying to understand why it seems like humanity has spent thousands of years not sleeping well. Strangely enough, the history of sleep is anything but restful. It's messy, itchy, and sometimes deadly. Back then, sleep wasn't. Just close your eyes and drift off. First, you needed something to sleep on. Believe it or not, beds were once a symbol of power. In ancient Egypt, only the elite had actual beds. Common folks? They curled up on the ground, used their arms as pillows, and hoped the bugs were tired too. And if you think that sounds a little unhygienic, you're absolutely right. The Romans, famous for loving comfort, came up with the first padded mattresses. Unfortunately, they were stuffed with hay, wool, and poorly washed animal fur. It wasn't unusual to wake up with at least one other living creature in bed. Later in China, the wealthy had ornately carved hardwood beds that kept out drafts, but they were so cold, people burned charcoal underneath them. Cozy, yes, until you died of carbon monoxide poisoning. A strange kind of gamble. And what about light? You couldn't just flip a switch. Only the wealthy could afford oil or candles to light an entire room. Most people simply went to bed when the sun went down because, well, there wasn't anything else to do. Besides, light could give away your location to people who weren't supposed to know where you were, like thieves or worse, tax collectors. Sleep wasn't a right, it was a reward, and like any reward, it could be taken away. In medieval monasteries, sleep was broken into chunks. A few hours of rest, then you'd wake up to chant prayers, then go back to sleep. Think staying up for a late college class is rough? Try waking at 2 a.m. to chant Latin hymns in a freezing stone chapel. Elsewhere, sleep could be dangerous. In big cities, noise never stopped. Horses clattering, people yelling, dogs barking. Windows weren't soundproof. And if you lived on an upper floor, no toilets. That dripping sound outside your window. Yeah, probably not rain. Here's a weird fact. In many parts of the world, people didn't sleep for 8 hours straight. In early modern Europe, they had 2 sleeps. First sleep in the evening, then a wakeful period around midnight, followed by second sleep. Until morning, they'd use that middle time to do chores, talk, or even visit neighbors. Kind of like when you wake up at 3 a.m. and suddenly want to clean the fridge. Maybe that's just ancient DNA kicking in. Historians still debate whether segmented sleep was a natural instinct or just a response to tough living conditions. But one thing is clear, sleep was never simple, especially when you had to share a bed with your entire family. Or like in Edo period Japan, sleep in a shared room with all the servants, children, and sometimes cats. What about the rich? Surely they slept better, right? Not exactly. Sure, they had beds, mattresses, pillows, but they also had worries, political plots, poisonings, or worse, lace gone wrong. You'd be surprised how stressful a dress could be, but we'll get to that later. Meanwhile, you, lying still, listening to yourself breathe, suddenly notice your modern pillow is a bit too warm on one side. You flip it over. Cool, soothing. And for a moment, you wonder if people back then even had pillows to flip. And as your curiosity deepens, one question rises. Who was the first person to think of lying on something soft? And why does that feel both bizarre and oddly beautiful? We'll search for that answer right after you turn off the lights, pull the blanket up a little higher, and remember, even if you're sleeping late, at least you don't have to burn dry dung as a nightlight. Good luck trying to fall asleep with that thought. You open your eyes, still not asleep, of course, and in front of you is a bed, not yours. No pristine white sheets, no LED color-changing nightlights. This is a wooden plank, rough, perhaps once part of a wagon, now repurposed with a blanket, as thin as a forgotten napkin. Yet this was once the pinnacle of luxury. Who invented the bed? The answer isn't a single person, but a long line of exhausted and weary humans over thousands of years thinking, there must be a better way to sleep than on the ground. And so the bed, seemingly simple, became a symbol of status, of evolution, and even a weapon in psychological warfare. In South Africa, the oldest known bed was found, a mat of plant material laid over a layer of ash, more than 70,000 years ago. Yes, you're lying on the upgraded version of that pile of rotting leaves. And the strange part, those prehistoric people already knew to choose leaves that contained insect-repelling essential oils, meaning they made scented beds while you're still drowning in artificial fresh linen sprays. In ancient Egypt, beds became a work of art and a PR tool. Pharaohs didn't just sleep, they performed their sleep. Their beds were elevated, intricately carved, often with lion paw legs, not because they liked big cats, but for power, dominance, and the ability to crush enemies even while snoring. You think that only happened in the ancient East? Not at all. In medieval Europe, beds were considered the most valuable piece of furniture in the home. So valuable that when marrying off daughters, families would send the bed along as part of the dowry. Weddings could even take place right on the bed, literally. You could say the honeymoon was a slightly too public affair. Of course, not everyone got to lie on a bed. What about the poor? You'd see them sleeping on benches, dirt floors, or if lucky, straw mats under burlap sacks. A little known fact, in 17th century England, many people paid to sleep standing, meaning they were allowed to lean against a wall to doze off. Sounds like a joke, but no, it was a real service. A bit like economy class airline seats, but without the flight crew. In Japan, during the Heian period, nobles had small lacquered wooden beds. But they didn't lie down. They sat to sleep. Yes, sat. Back straight, head gently tilted. Why? Because lying flat was seen as improper. Every sleeping posture conveyed something about morality, dignity. Meanwhile, you're just trying not to drop your phone on your face. In Ming Dynasty China, the bed was not just for sleep, but also for political negotiations. The canopy bed was where wives managed household finances, received guests, and educated children. A multi-purpose space like a co-working hub, but with incense instead of espresso. Historians still debate whether people in the past slept better because they had no modern pressures, or worse, due to harsh living conditions. The truth is probably somewhere in between. But one thing's for sure, if you've ever slept on a broken spring mattress, you're closer to an 18th century experience than you think. Ever wonder why modern beds are so high? The reason, height once symbolized separation from the ground, meaning cleanliness, wealth, and more importantly, fewer rats. In old Europe, if your bed was high enough to need a stepping stool, you were essentially sleeping on, top of society, while the lower class, quite literally, stayed on the ground floor, sometimes even under your bed. A famous bed in England called the Great Bed of Ware was built in 1590, wide enough to fit 15 adults. It was used in inns as a novelty, because who wouldn't want to sleep among strangers, right? A kind of pre-internet Airbnb. And then you're back in your darkroom, with the mattress gradually molding to your body's weight. You think of golden beds or straw mats hastily laid out, and ask yourself, am I lucky? Maybe, even if you still have to wake up at 7 a.m. tomorrow, but don't celebrate too soon. In the Middle Ages, sleeping too long could be considered a sign of laziness, even sin. Sleeping beyond God's permitted hours was thought to be a descent into delusion or heresy. And that's the story of the next chapter. You feel your eyelids start to grow heavy, but not yet. Tonight you still have to pass the church, the prayers, and the midnight bells. And sometimes the nightmares people once believed were sent by demons guarding your bedside. You're dreaming, or rather, you're dreaming about a time when people didn't dream, not because they didn't have dreams, but because dreaming was seen as confusing, dangerous, or even sinful. But before we reach those disorienting mornings and bizarre dream interpretation books, you must first face what was once a true nightmare, the medieval night. You know that feeling when the power goes out? Everything goes dark, sounds disappear, and suddenly you can hear your heartbeat. Now imagine that, all night, every night, your whole life. No streetlights, no softly playing TV, just darkness, thick as velvet, so dense you couldn't even see your fingers if you held them up. And so humans began to fear the dark, not in a childish, afraid of ghosts way, but a primal fear. In the blackness, thieves could slip in, fevers would spread, black cats, owls, and women who lived alone were seen as signs of the devil. And if you think being sleep-deprived makes you cranky, try sleeping in fear. In medieval Europe, villages had no streetlights, only communal torches, often extinguished early to save oil. If you stepped outside after sunset, you were left with only the sound of your own footsteps and the question, is someone following me? And maybe someone was. So people slept in groups, families, neighbors, even wandering strangers who stopped by asking for shelter, all piled together. Not because they loved being that close, but because sleeping alone meant being in danger. You lay between three strangers and think to yourself, I hope this one doesn't snore, that one doesn't sleepwalk, and the last one isn't a thief. But not everyone feared the dark the same way. Theologians of the time believed night was when demons were most active. There were special prayers just for when you laid your head down, called vigil prayers. Some people tied small crucifixes under their pillows or hung garlic above their beds. Who needs melatonin, right? You might remember Dorasuaga. There was once a time when people believed dreams were messages from God, but then quickly they started thinking maybe they were from the devil, and so dreams became a moral gray area. A noblewoman once said she dreamt of eating strawberries and was accused of having sinful thoughts. Because strawberries, you know, round, plump, seductive. Here's a little-known fact. In the 13th century, dream manuals, books decoding dreams, circulated across Europe. Dream of water? That's good. Dream of losing your shoes? You're about to get married. Dream of a dead pig? Time to fast. Historians still debate whether people truly believed in these omens or just used them as excuses to do what they already wanted. In contrast, the Islamic world at the time took dreams very seriously. You were encouraged to write down every dream, then consult a mubashir, a kind of dream analyst, for interpretation. There was an incredibly detailed decoding system. They wouldn't just ask, what did you dream, but also, what did you eat before bed? Very modern. Meanwhile, in China, people believed your soul could leave your body during sleep, wander, and, if lucky, return. So if you slept with your feet uncovered, your soul might get lost. You glance down at your foot sticking out from the blanket and gently pull it back in, and then you arrive at a morning in Versailles. A French queen awakens, not because of a dream, but because a line of attendants is already waiting for their turn to witness her yawn. Marie Antoinette didn't just have a bed, she had a waking ceremony, a miniature ritual with snacks, perfume, and the day's lace selection. While you dig for a shirt that isn't wrinkled, she had to choose between 3 types of Italian lace, each one more expensive than your apartment. Her sleep was public. Sometimes a dozen attendants would be present as she lay down. Think. You feel pressured when a guest sleeps over. Try falling asleep while being watched by nobility. And her bed. Oh dear, it wasn't a bed. It was a throne with a mattress. The sheets were hand-embroidered by artisans who spent 6 months on them. The pillows were stuffed with swan feathers. The curtains were as thick as armor. And of course, lace. So much lace. Lace on her nightgown, lace on the pillows, lace even on her house slippers. All of it had to be inspected by the Inspecteur Général du Dentel, a real job, the National Lace Quality Inspector. You wonder, maybe she wasn't executed for saying, "Let them eat cake." Maybe people were just exhausted from ironing. All that lace, for Marie, sleep wasn't an escape. It was part of the royal performance. Every yawn, every sleeping position was documented. People sketched her posture as she turned over. Sounds absurd? Just remember, today, millions of people watch videos titled 10 Ways to Sleep Like a Princess. You pull your blanket up to your face, dreaming of sleep with no lace, no rituals, no wandering souls. Just you and your steady breath. Perhaps the most universal thing throughout all of history is when you finally get to really sleep, and you're quite sure you don't want a crowd staring at you while you drool. You open your eyes, not fully awake, but no longer dreaming either. Everything around you seems to move slowly, a scene from the 17th century, where heavy perfumes mask the real smells, and people sleep in ways utterly unlike your own. You're in Paris during the Baroque era, when people slept twice each night. Yes, twice. Not because they had insomnia, but because that's how the world used to work. Sleep was divided into 2 blocks, first sleep and second sleep. You would go to bed at sunset around 9 p.m. and wake up about 4 hours later, around 1 a.m. Then you did things. Some people prayed, some mended clothes, some baked, some did the thing we now coyly call marital relations. Many historical records suggest that the time between sleeps, called the watch, was considered ideal for conception. Some physicians back then even advised couples to wait until after the first sleep to better welcome the gift of parenthood. Charming or bizarre? You decide. Then, after 2 quiet hours in the middle of the night, you would fall asleep again until dawn. The second sleep, longer and deeper, carried you into morning. The new day began not with coffee or alarms, but with roosters crowing and the clatter of carriage wheels under your window. Historians still debate why this biphasic sleep faded away. Some blame streetlights, artificial light, kept people awake longer. Others point to industrialization. Time became money, and sleep had to be compressed. Perhaps it was society shifting from living by nature to living by the clock. Whatever. The reason you can't help but wonder, are we sleeping wrong? Here's a strange truth few know. Europeans back then believed sleeping flat was unhealthy. Blood, they thought, would rush to the head. So they slept, slightly upright, almost, half-seated. That's why antique beds often have high headboards, and the pillows look like stair steps. Think hotel pillows are uncomfortable? Try sleeping at a 45-degree angle all night. In monasteries, sleep was even more strictly regimented. You see monks, robed, quietly returning to their small sleeping cells. They didn't lie fully down, but leaned against the bed's edge, maintaining a posture of humility, because even sleep was part of discipline. No dreaming, no laziness, a sleep of restraint where you weren't allowed to snore. Meanwhile, at the court of Louis XIV, the Sun King, you witness the classic contrast. The bed was no longer just for rest, but a stage. The king's bed sat in the center of the room, on a raised platform, and had a formal name, lit de parade. Yes, the ceremonial bed. Each morning Louis woke in a ritual called the lever du roi, where nobles gathered for the honor of watching him open his eyes. Some were invited just to warm the slippers. If you were a noble, but not on the Watch the King Yawn list, you knew you had fallen out of favor. You wonder, did they sleep well, knowing that tomorrow dozens of people would witness them rubbing their eyes? Some even slept in chairs. That's right, the fauteuil de nuit, night chair, where gentlemen could doze while keeping their elaborately styled hair intact. And women? They used fabric bands to hold their hair in place all night, like sandwich wrap to keep it from drying out. And if you think memory foam is a modern luxury, know this. Louis XIV had a special mattress made of sheep tails, extremely soft, extremely light, but also extremely prone to bugs. Sleep like a king? Maybe not. At this point, you realize something. Across the centuries, there is no correct way to sleep. Only ways that suited people, based on the times, the beliefs, and their status. A farmer slept on the ground after a day in the fields. A noble slept in silk, with 5 servants fanning the air. Both snored. One just got mosquito bites, the other got recorded in the Royal Chronicle. As you think of Marie Antoinette picking out the right lace for a ceremonial sleep, another image appears, the ticking of a mechanical clock. A small invention, but one that would transform how humans relate to sleep. Sleep was no longer felt, it was measured. 8 hours on time. No drift. You burrow deeper into your blanket, eyes heavy, thinking, maybe waking in the middle of the night isn't insomnia. Maybe you're just a 17th century soul lost in a world of LED lights and phone notifications. You jolt awake in an unfamiliar room, not because of a nightmare, but because of the church bells. A low, hollow chime echoing through stained glass windows. You're in London in the year 1665. The city has fallen into a cold, eerie silence. The time of the Great Plague. This is an era where sleep is no longer a given. You lie on a narrow bed in a wooden house with a low ceiling, the air thick with the smell of herbs. People stuff dried lavender into their pillows, burn pine wood by the bedside, even place raw onions near their heads. The goal? To purify bad air. A method you won't find in any modern meditation app. Sleep has become a negotiation with death. You lie on your side, avoiding facing the door, because it's believed evil spirits enter from that direction. You also try not to sleep too deeply, because lying still like the dead is seen as a bad omen. Some even ask loved ones to wake them every 2 hours, just to make sure they're still alive. Here's a little-known fact. In the London slums of that time, people slept in shifts, not because they worked 3 jobs, but because there weren't enough beds. Bed sharing was common. You paid for a 4-hour shift, then gave up the spot to the next person. 1 bed for 3 people rotating, like an Airbnb during an outbreak. And no, there were no star ratings. Historians still debate whether people truly believed bad smells caused the disease, or if they were just desperately searching for a reason. But the result was the same. Sleep became dangerous. If you slept too soundly, you might never wake up. If you coughed during the night, your bedmate might flee before sunrise. To ward off fear, people wrote sleep charms, scraps of paper marked with strange symbols tucked under pillows. Some slept with knives beneath their pillows to fight off evil spirits. Others taped images of Jesus to their foreheads before bed. If you think your bedtime rituals are strange, counting sheep, checking the locks 5 times, know that someone once hung a raven's skull by their bed to chase away cold air. Still, not everyone drowned in fear. While the poor huddled in basement rooms, the nobility, slept quite differently. You step into a grand house in Westminster. The bedroom is called the withdrawing room, not because anyone's retreating, but because it's a private space for conversation before pretending to go to bed. That's right. Going to bed for the nobility wasn't always about sleep. It was a polite way to end a social evening. Marie, a stylish lady, might rise and declare, "I'm tired," then withdraw from the party. No one followed, unless invited. That meant her husband, or someone very special. And the rest of the night? You can imagine, one popular sleep item of the time, the sleeping bonnet. Not for warmth, but to protect one's hair. People didn't wash their hair often, maybe once a month, or even once a season. So keeping it neat while sleeping was vital. Looking good in sleep wasn't for the mirror. It was because others would see you, even when you snored. You know this already. Europeans of the time didn't sleep naked. Not even in summer, because if there was a fire, a common occurrence, especially with bedside candles, you needed to run into the street in a state socially acceptable. Sleeping ready to escape has never been more accurate. And then comes 1666, a year after the plague. London burns, the Great Fire. You hear screams, the crash of collapsing roof tiles. The city glows like a sunrise at midnight. People rush from their homes, wrapped in blankets, clutching strange things. Holy paintings, loaves of bread, a beloved wooden dog. One man, truly, tried to carry his bed. Because to him, a bed was sacred, a place where you are born, where you love, and where you finally die. You remember that feeling, the old bed, sagging in the middle, the smell of aged fabric and familiarity. It wasn't just a piece of furniture, it was where you were yourself. As the city turns to ash, a new generation is born. Children who come after the plague, after the fire, after the loss. They no longer believe in old charms, they'll grow. Up with oil lamps, ticking clocks, books teaching the science of sleep. But still, in their eyes, you can see it. That flicker of hesitation when darkness falls, when night knocks again. You return to your own bed in this century. But you can still feel the breath of someone who once slept before you, the worry, the longing, and the quiet hope that when they close their eyes, they might dream of something better. And no matter what, no one truly wants to wake in the middle of the night just to find they've been sleeping in an age of plague and ash. You feel a warm breath of air against your face, a dry breeze laced with the scent of dust and spices. You open your eyes, sit up, and find yourself in a rough canvas tent in the middle of the Egyptian desert in ancient times. Outside, the sun hasn't fully risen, but the heat has already seeped through every seam. You hear the clatter of camels' hooves, and in the distance, a prayer echoes from the temple of Isis. Here, sleep is not a private matter. You sleep alongside your family, sometimes even with small livestock. Children sprawl across woven mats. Adults lie side by side, heads resting on their arms. Mattresses, none. Pillows, just a rectangular block of stone, no joke. The ancient Egyptians believed that a high headrest kept the soul from drifting away during sleep. And you thought hugging a pillow was weird? A strange fact. Pharaohs wore makeup before going to bed, not for beauty, but to ward off demons. The black coal around the eyes wasn't just cosmetic, it was a magical barrier. Because in Egyptian belief, sleep was a perilous journey. Your soul left your body, wandered through the spirit world, and if you weren't careful, it might never return. You hear tales of the Ba, the part of the soul that flies from your body as you sleep, like a bird with a human head. And the Ka, the part that stays behind waiting to be reunited come morning. If the Ba didn't return in time, you didn't wake up. That's why people placed amulets under their beds or drew the Ankh, the symbol of life, on the bed frame. Historians still debate whether the ancient Egyptians truly believed in prophetic dreams or simply used them as metaphors. But there's no denying They recorded dreams more seriously than you jot down tomorrow's to-do list. There were even official dream interpretation manuals kept in temple libraries. If you dreamt of flying fish, it didn't mean you had a late-night snack. It might be a sign of a failed harvest. Sleep here always came with ritual. Before bed, you washed your hands, rubbed lotus oil on your temples, and lay on your left side, mimicking the posture of gods sleeping in their tombs. To Egyptians, death was just a very long sleep, and every night's rest was a small rehearsal for eternity. You step into the tomb of a priest, not to rob it, don't worry, but to witness how sacred sleep was to the ancients. On the walls are intricate paintings of beautiful dreams, where the dead meet Osiris, drink from the Nile in visions, and embrace loved ones long gone. No alarm clocks, no deadlines, just eternal peace like a Sunday that never ends. Then you notice a curious detail. The dead are not laid flat. They are placed on their sides, hands crossed over their chests, as if sleeping. It's not just a burial position. It's a gesture of hope, that one day they will wake up in another world, where all the beautiful dreams come true. Meanwhile, in cities like Thebes or Memphis, the middle class lived in cramped quarters and sleeping. Space was often the rooftop. In summer, no one could stand being indoors, so you'd see people bringing mats upstairs, carrying water jugs, and sleeping beneath the stars. No walls, no doors, just the vast sky and the chill of night. If you've ever camped outdoors, this is the dry season edition. For months on end, an old joke etched into Egyptian pottery goes, "The husband sleeps like a mummy, the wife turns like a wheel." Apparently, blanket stealing has always been a thing. You drift back to the present for a moment and feel your memory foam pillow as a kind of blessing. But you also realize something. Ancient sleep wasn't separated from life. It wasn't boxed into a closed room or squeezed between two calendar meetings. It was part of the cosmos, where gods entered your dreams, and death was simply asleep with no alarm clock. You exhale gently, eyes closing, and imagine yourself as a bob bird gliding out of the room, floating over the dreamy Nile, then landing in a field where time doesn't exist. There, everyone sleeps well. No one screams over missed deadlines. And certainly no one uses a minion's alarm clock. You wake with a start on a cold autumn night, the sound of horse hooves echoing on cobblestones drifting in from afar. As you open your eyes, the pale moonlight spills through a small window, illuminating a modest wooden room, low, damp, and bone-chillingly cold. You've been taken back to a small farm in central France in the 18th century, a time when sleep began to split in two. By now, you're no stranger to this. People in the past didn't sleep in one continuous stretch like we do. They divided sleep into two parts. The first sleep began around 8 p.m. and lasted until about midnight. After that, people would wake up and stay up for an hour or two before returning to their second sleep. You rise from the straw mattress, the crackling of embers in the hearth clearly audible. During that waking period between the two sleeps, what did people do? All sorts of things. Prayed, mended clothes, read, if they were wealthy enough to afford candles, or simply whispered to one another. Sometimes those whispers turned to laughter, then to soft moans, and finally to a suggestive silence. Historians call this the intimate hour, a quiet lull between two bouts of slumber. Here's a little-known truth. In many rural parts of France, children were taught to split their sleep from an early age as a rite of passage. Sleeping through the night in one go was seen as lazy, only for those with nothing useful to do in the middle of the night. And you thought waking at 5 a.m. made you productive. Historians still debate whether segmented sleep was widespread across Europe or mainly a feature of agrarian regions. But you can feel it. Your body, once freed from phones and LED lights, begins to follow the rhythm of natural darkness. Sleepiness comes earlier. Waking in the middle of the night feels calm. No anxiety, no buzzing alarms. You step outside, the moon casting its glow over a mist-covered field. An elderly couple sits side by side, hands intertwined, saying nothing. Just being, suspended between two worlds, between sleep and wakefulness, between yesterday and tomorrow. And you realize sometimes waking at 2 a.m. isn't a disorder, it's stillness. Back in the house, you're lying in a room, shared by 3 generations on a large communal bed. No one has their own room. No one locks their doors. That's why you sleep as if on a train, hearing every breath, every rustle, every drowsy murmur of the person beside you. Privacy was a luxury, but closeness was infinite. Still, with that closeness came nighttime fears. Children were told that if they slept in the wrong position, on their stomachs, arms too wide, the demon Genevieve would enter their dreams and pull out their souls. Think Freddy Krueger, but in a wool cloak and speaking Occitan. Some mothers hung laurel, wreaths on the bed frame, not for decoration, but to ward off spirits. If you've ever used essential oils for sleep, this was the pre-industrial version. You hear a folk tale. A sleepwalker who wandered out of his home in the night walked straight into the river, and when they found him the next morning, he was still standing there, eyes closed, feet sunken in mud, as if dreaming while awake. No one dared wake him, for they believed to call a sleepwalker by their real name would cause their soul to be lost forever. You shiver slightly, not from fear, but because you understand. Sleep in those days wasn't something you owned. It was a place you passed through, a realm with its own rules, its blurred boundaries, and its strange inhabitants. By the end of the century, as artificial lighting spread, the habit of segmented sleep began to fade. Big cities like Paris, Lyon, and Bordeaux lit up their streets. And when the night was no longer truly dark, people no longer slept the same. Two-phase sleep slipped from memory, like an old friend you once knew deeply, but can no longer name. You return to the bed listening to the soft breathing beside you. You can't quite remember who's sleeping next to you in this part of your memory. Maybe a grandmother, a friend, or simply a version of yourself from another life. But you know one thing for certain. Once upon a time, between two closures of the eyelids, people found belief, fear, and comfort, and you realize, too, waking in the middle of the night isn't a mistake. Sometimes it's a chance to whisper to yourself, to lay your hand on your chest, and ask what your heart is dreaming. Then, gently, you exhale and slip into the second sleep, like a traveler returning home after a brief stop on the road. You jolt awake to the sound of a ding, a brass bell ringing somewhere down the street, not an alarm clock, but the curfew bell. You're in 17th century London, a city cloaked in smoke, dust, and the lingering dread of a plague just past, and about to stumble into a great fire. You're standing in a cramped lodging room, wooden walls and a ceiling so low you could touch it with an outstretched hand. On the narrow bed lies a rumpled sheet, and what people of the time called a mattress, really just a cloth sack stuffed with straw, or if luck failed you, hay riddled with bugs. Of course, the blanket is coarse wool. And if you turn and spot a cockroach, congratulations, you're experiencing the noble sleep of the Stuart era. But amid this roughness, strange ideas began to emerge. Efficient sleep, the sleep of virtue, and even stranger, sleep as a measure of character. During this period, philosopher John Locke wrote that children should be trained to sleep on bare wooden floors to acquaint them with hardship. Can you imagine the PR pitch for a stone mattress? Awaken the grit within, a curious truth. Some people were paid just to wake others up. They were called knocker-uppers, using long sticks to tap on customers' windows at the appointed hour. Without them, you might oversleep and miss your own hanging if you were a condemned criminal. Yes, punctuality could be a matter of life and death. Historians still debate how many hours people actually slept during this time, as diaries record plenty of activity in the middle of the night, from prayer and letter writing to philosophical discussions. Some nobles even hosted midnight feasts with cold meats, weak beer, and poetry readings by flickering oil lamps. If you think working at night is a modern invention, you've clearly never been jolted awake at 2 a.m. by metaphysical poetry. You step out onto the street, the cobblestones slick with dew, where night watchmen still cry out, 3 o'clock, all's well. Part announcement, part lullaby. A kind of public ASMR if you think about it. Sadly, no one was live streaming it on TikTok. Then it strikes you. The idea of a private bed was still novel for the middle class. Many people rented bed by the hour. They called it bed share. Not romantic, just too poor to afford a whole night. If you've ever tried co-living, meet your ancestors, except they bunked beside a cobbler instead of a startup engineer. Yet in wealthier homes, the bed was the center of ceremony. Beds were placed in the middle of the room, canopied on all sides, embroidered with the family name. When someone died, they lay there surrounded by family and mourners. The bed was not just for sleep. It was a place of birth, of death, of negotiation, and sometimes of war declarations. IKEA still has a ways to go in terms of multifunctionality. Another memorable point, 17th century Brits deeply believed that dreams were prophetic. Dreaming of losing teeth? Not a dentist issue. Someone is going to die. Dreaming of clear water? Good news. Murky water? Imprisonment may loom. Entire guides existed on how to cleanse the mind before sleep to avoid nightmares, including reading psalms, drinking peppermint tea, and avoiding cheese after 6 p.m. Cheese to them was the gateway to horror. You step into a 2-story wooden house where a mother is lulling her child with a faint lullaby about an owl flying over the rooftop. If the owl hoots 3 times, your father won't come home. Peaceful and terrifying. You lie back on the straw bed, your body heavy, not from discomfort but from sensing the frantic, uncertain rhythm of a city struggling with plague and dreams alike. Sleep is no longer a haven. It's a battleground of spirit, faith, and the fear of being awakened too soon. And yet, amid it all, your heart softens as the church bell tolls 4 times, like a giant heartbeat echoing through the city. No one sleeps soundly, but everyone sleeps, each in their own way. You wake up in a setting so luxurious that even your dreams feel underdressed. A gilded ceiling, deep red velvet curtains cascading from the high roof to the floor, and a bed so enormous you could hold 3 separate meetings on its corners. Welcome to Versailles, the 18th century, the golden age of power sleep. Or rather, sleep with an audience. You're in the bedchamber of Louis XIV, the Sun King, and if you think your morning routine is complicated, coffee, emails, missing socks, you've never witnessed the royal lever, the king's waking ceremony. Louis didn't just wake up. He was raised from slumber. At around 8 a.m., dozens of courtiers would line up outside the room, waiting their turn to enter. One would hand him a face cloth, another would select his stockings, and the luckiest of all would fasten the first button of his shirt. And there you stand amidst envious glances as Louis opens his eyes, and the entire room bows. Yes, waking up at Versailles was a privilege of political magnitude. A little-known fact, Louis XIV owned over 400 beds across his various palaces, but he only actually slept in a few of them. The rest were for posing, resting, or simply making people think he was there. A kind of proxy bed, you might call it. Clearly, the idea of working from bed wasn't born yesterday. Historians still debate how much Louis actually slept. His personal diaries are filled with late-night meetings, banquets, and time allotted to lovers. Yet, even if he slept little, he wanted the world to know every time he closed his eyes it was an act of governance. You sleep to rest. He slept to rule. You lie on his bed, just to try it, and you realize it's not soft at all. The mattress is firm, the pillows tall, and everything is embroidered in silk so fine you feel like you might be defiling cultural heritage just by sweating. But that was the point. The king's bed wasn't meant for comfort. It was a symbol, much like your shoe collection, not necessarily made for walking. You step into the hallway and see a maid dusting the wall. Every bedroom in the palace had a dedicated pillow attendant, a blanket supervisor, and even someone in charge of the scent. Yes, there was a person whose job it was to perfume the sheets. That person may not have been literate, but they could tell real Provençal lavender from the cheap stuff from Grasse. At the time, sleep was a reflection of status. If you slept in utter silence, behind drawn curtains, under watchful guards, you were nobility. If you slept on the floor in the marketplace under an oil lamp, you were merely a part of the city. Versailles built an entire sleep system. To reinforce that message, the king's slumber was a performance. And you're watching from the front row. Here's a funny thing. For all Versailles' grandeur, it lacked proper plumbing. So, in the middle of the night, if a noble needed the bathroom, they might knock on another bedroom to borrow a chamber pot. Sometimes the most royal of sleeps was disturbed by the clatter of a very dignified emergency. You pass a smaller room, the maids' quarters. They lie huddled on straw beds, some still in their dresses, combs still in hand. Sleep was merely a pause in their service. No one spoke of dreaming. It was just a way to forget aching feet. You wonder, how did Marie Antoinette sleep? She had her own bed, of course. But truth be told, with so many courtly rules, she often had to pretend to sleep, or not sleep, to demonstrate noble alertness. It was once written, she woke as if she had never closed her eyes. A standard too high for anyone, unless you're a robot. You lie down again, this time on a courtier's bed, not too large, not too stiff. And here you find something absent from the king's mattress, a gently pressed pillow, a neatly folded blanket, and a faint scent of faded rose. You know you've lain where someone once truly dreamed, not for show, but for themselves. Then you close your eyes, imagining a Versailles without candlelight or fanfare. Only the breath of a sleeping palace remains. All the layers of class, intrigue, and elaborate language soften into a single, slow heartbeat. Even the sun must set to make way for night. You turn over, and this time wake up to the scent of smoke and coffee, but not the smoke of war. This one is tobacco, parchment, and revolution. Paris, late 18th century, and you are at the heart of the historical storm, the French Revolution. Wooden clogs echo on cobbled streets, political debates hum through every salon, and above, lace curtains flutter like whispers from a society on the verge of collapse. You're lying in the bedroom of a very famous woman, though at this point few dare say her name aloud, Marie Antoinette, the queen of aesthetics and scandal, once crowned with wigs tall enough for birds to nest in, and the woman, rumor has it, who was nearly captured simply for wearing too much lace. A true event. In October 1789, a crowd of women marched from Paris to the Palace of Versailles in hunger and fury. They stormed into the Queen's bedroom, overturning everything. What shocked them wasn't treasure, it was lingerie. Ribbons, silks, lace, so extravagant you could trade them for a small apartment. No kitchen, but still. Your fingers graze the bed sheets, so smooth it feels like stroking the palm of a supernatural midwife. Marie's bed was built like ours, a tiny stage, raised from the ground with steps leading up, always facing outward. Why? Because even while sleeping, she was watched. Public waking wasn't just for kings. The Queen, too, had her own lever de la reine, a traditional waking ceremony before the court's eyes, a strange truth, Marie was harshly criticized for wearing a simple white cotton dress. The chemise à la reine, though plain, outraged the aristocracy for making her look like a servant. Odd, isn't it? That in that era, a powerful woman dressing comfortably was considered revolutionary. You in your bear print. Pajamas aren't quite shaking the monarchy, but still. Historians still debate whether Marie truly understood what was happening or was simply lost in her silk-draped fantasies. Some say she was too dreamy to grasp the danger. Others believe she knew, but couldn't escape the crushing gears of the royal machine. You walk down the hallway, the dry clack of guards' boots echoing off the walls. In a small room nearby, royal soldiers take turns napping on makeshift wooden beds. No curtains, no mattresses. They sleep short, an hour, maybe two, then rise again to patrol. Back then, sleep wasn't rest. It was the shortest way to outrun exhaustion. In the streets of Paris, you step into an ordinary home. A low ceiling, a small room, one chair, and a sleeping spot shared by 3 people. A mother hums a lullaby to her baby. Tiny domino of mine, don't fear the gunshots. Outside are the hammers of the guillotine and the horns of death. But inside, sleep is still sacred. The sleep of the poor, though thin and cold, still holds dignity. And then there are nights, like Marie's last. At the conciergerie prison, when sleep becomes a luxury. In a cold stone room, no mattress, no silk, only straw spread on the floor. She sits in silence. No one knows if she truly slept, or just closed her eyes to escape the revolution's unblinking stare. You picture it, the woman who once wore wigs, heavier than wedding cakes, who once slept on hand-embroidered cushions, now curled up like any other forgotten soul. In those final nights, no lavender, no golden-threaded nightgowns, just broken breaths, like someone counting down the last moments of freedom. An unbelievable fact. When she was executed, she held herself with such grace that the crowd paused, not out of forgiveness, but because they saw not everyone can die as a symbol. And the way she stepped onto the scaffold after so many sleepless nights proved one thing. Sometimes your final pride lies in not asking for 5 more minutes. You sigh, return to bed, and realize you're still lying in that golden bedroom. But something has changed. Dust veils the curtains, the pillow has sunken, and morning light crawls through the window like a frail finger. Versailles is no longer a fortress of dreams. It is a tomb for a sleep that never found peace.